The August heat in Natchez County hung over Rosewood Manor like a cast-iron lid, trapping every scent of ripening figs, sweat, and old wood. Magnolia leaves browned at the edges and curled inward as if ashamed to be seen. On the front gallery, Eleanor Whitford stood rigidly, one hand on a flaking column, measuring the distance between what the manor had been and what it was now, a gracious ruin wearing its dignity like a borrowed dress. She was 34, a widow for 8 months, and the arithmetic in her head never stopped. Debts, ledgers, deadlines, each number, a stone weighing down the ribs of the house and her chest alike. Mrs. Whitford. The voice carried from the doorway, low and soft, a kitchen timbre made of heat and flour. Jonas filled the frame. He always did 6'5", shoulders wide, hands big enough to turn a watermelon like an apple. The light caught his skin, the color of wet river clay, his gaze steady in that unthreatening, practiced way that let white men laugh and call him simple. Simple Jonas, they said. The best cook in 3 counties and the worst conversationalist. Eleanor knew better. She had watched him choose silence the way a duelist chooses distance. "Is the bread ready?" she asked without turning. "Yes, ma'am," and the peach cobbler used the last of the sugar. He paused. The last of it. The phrase was a bell tolling through the gallery. In less than 3 weeks, the bank would come. They would take the house, then the land, then the people, and at last they would take her name until nothing remained but a story drunk men told about the pretty Whitford widow who sank in the Mississippi mud. "Come sit," she said, surprising herself as much as him. Her voice came out even, but it had a new edge, as if she'd decided to set her own bones without a doctor. She gestured to the cane chairs that caught the evening's weak breeze. A slave did not sit with his mistress in Natchez County. Jonas's hesitation lasted the length of a heartbeat and a lifetime. Then he lowered himself into the chair. The wicker uttered a long, creaking objection. From the quarters, a hum rose and broke into a work song, old as sorrow and the river. Eleanor let the sound steady her like a hand at the small of her back. She had rehearsed this conversation a dozen times, and yet the words still tasted like sin. "I know about Philippe Mercier," she said. Jonas's face did not change, but the cords in his forearms went taut. Somewhere in the oaks, a cicada scraped its violin. "I know you worked for him in New Orleans," she continued, "and I know he trusted you. He wrote to my husband 3 letters in French. He spoke of investments, of gold brought from Haiti when the island was burning and the port was turning pockets inside out. He wrote of a servant, d'un homme digne de confiance, given something to protect. That servant's name was Jonas." The song from the quarters died. The silence that followed felt like the hush before thunder. "Ma'am," Jonas said slowly, his voice a stone dropped into a deep well. "Mr. Mercier was a good man." "Where is it?" she asked. He did not blink. "Where is what, ma'am?" "The fortune." She turned to him now, fully. Desperation had clarified into resolve. "Don't pretend with me. My husband bought you in New Orleans for 3 times what any man there paid for a cook. He bragged about the bargain, but he was not a man who overpaid. He bought a secret, and the servant who carried it. I have heard you speak French when you thought no one listening. I have watched you read when men said you could not. You are not what they think you are, Jonas, and we are running out of time." He sat very still. The heat pressed down. A nightbird called and went quiet, as if the trees themselves were listening. Eleanor reached into her reticule and took out a folded paper, crisp, clean, and her only well of leverage left. "Manumission," she said, "signed when the debt is paid and the house is safe. Help me save Rosewood. You leave this place a free man with enough to choose a life." The paper trembled in her hand before she realized it was his hand making it tremble. He took the document and read, the skin around his eyes tightening. He traced the line where her signature would go, where a witness would name what was real. "What makes you think," he said at last carefully, "that I would tell you if there was something to tell?" "Because men with guns and paper are coming to measure my bones," she said. "Because when they are done with me, they will measure yours too. Whatever you have protected for 6 years will be dug up by someone who calls it his by nature. If Mercier trusted you to keep it from wolves, then this is the moment you do so again." He breathed out. It sounded like defeat and sounded like decision and sounded like neither. "What else do the letters say?" he asked. "That Mercier vanished in 1846 off Mobile Bay, that the hurricane took the man but not what he hid. that he loved too many kinds of danger, revolution first, then smuggling, then an idea he thought he could transplant into American soil. She paused and met his gaze levelly. He said only someone worthy should ever claim what he buried. Worthy, Jonas repeated, as if the word itself might hold water. He glanced beyond the gallery to the long slope of cotton, the river glinting through trees like a knife's edge. Mercia had a talent for choosing the right word and the wrong country. Eleanor allowed herself the smallest curl of a smile. Then choose, Jonas. Ma'am, you know what a thing like this would bring down upon you, even without the gold. He turned back. They will come. They will call you mad. Call me worse. They will do more than call. His eyes were not simple now. They were the eyes of a man who had measured the cost of existing and kept his own books. I know, she said. I married a man for respectability and discovered he'd mortgaged it. I have paid for my illusions. I will not pay for theirs. The cicadas rose in a sawtooth chorus. Far off, thunder talked about heading this way. Tell me the rest, he said. She told him how Charles had hidden his debts in bottles and boasts, how she had opened a drawer in the study and found a different life folded beneath the brandy ledger. Mercier's letters, the scent of tobacco and sea salt trapped in paper fibers, a map without names, only measurements, a line about trust and a single initial, J. She told him how, after the funeral, she started moving like a ghost through her own house, seeing seams where she had once seen plaster, counting steps where she had once floated, tracing the cool drafts where a wall should have ended. The house had started talking to her, and that terrified her less than men. He listened the way a craftsman measures wood without waste. When she finished, he took a small leather pouch from around his neck and untied it. In his palm lay a thin silver ring with a French motto, worn nearly smooth by time and thumb: Liberté, Égalité, Fraternité. The word Bastille was scratched there, a relic of a stormed prison and an idea that refused to drown. Mercia gave me this, Jonas said, not because he believed slogans change men, because he believed time does. He told me to protect what he valued most. The gold, she said. Jonas closed his fist around the ring, the promise in it. Beyond the gallery, a wagon rattled by on the road. She imagined its driver, imagined the gossip already moving from porch to porch like ragweed, how the widow Whitford spoke to her cook as if he had a mind, how she let him sit, how Rosewood was slipping, and wasn't it a shame, and wasn't it an opportunity? Judge Holloway owes my father a favor, Eleanor said. He will not bless sin, but he will bless a signature. With the right signatures, the law becomes a shield, flimsy but better than air. At the word law, something like bitterness flashed behind Jonas's calm. The law is a coat cut to white men's shoulders. Then we will wear it like thieves, she said, almost daring him to flinch. Use it until we can afford a better garment. A gust came and moved warm rain scent across the gallery. He tilted his head as if listening to something only he could hear. Perhaps the kitchen clock, perhaps the world measuring their time. He looked back at her and did not pretend any longer. If I show you what Mercier built, he said, you do not own it, not as property, not as inheritance. You accept terms like a partner. She nodded before he finished the sentence, the sound escaping her like relief and like a vow. Partners, she said, and the word felt dangerous in the mouth and right in the bones. He slid the ring back into its pouch and tucked it under his shirt. Then tonight you will eat, and you will sleep, because tomorrow what we do will change everything, and you will need your strength. He stood, and the chair sighed with gratitude. At dawn come to the kitchen, bring a lantern, and shoes you do not mind ruining. Eleanor rose too. The heat pressed closer, and so did the storm. Somewhere down near the slave quarters, the song had started again, low, steady, a rhythm of men and women who understood that the body could be made to work for things the heart refused to believe in. She found herself standing a little taller, as if the gallery had lifted an inch beneath her feet. Jonas, she said, stopping him at the threshold. If the bank asks where the money came from, if anyone asks, what shall I say? That your husband left you his last good lie, he said, not unkindly, and that you learned to tell it better than he did. He disappeared into the cool interior of the house, footsteps heavy on pine boards he knew by memory. Eleanor remained on the gallery a moment longer, watching the horizon where the river flashed its cold steel. The sky opened and sent a few exploratory drops that darkened the dust in perfect circles before vanishing. She thought of Mercier at sea, a storm swallowing a ship, of a ring carried from France to Haiti to Louisiana like an ember cupped in a palm, of a cook who was not simple and a woman who had pretended to be. The first distant thunderclap finally arrived over the fields. She went inside to eat what Jonas had made, to sleep in a house that was not yet lost, and to wake to a secret that had been waiting beneath her floors longer than her marriage had lasted. In the morning, she told herself, the world would still be cruel, but for the first time since Charles died, it might also be negotiable. The next morning broke under a low grey sky. The air before a storm in Mississippi was always like that, thick, metallic, waiting. Eleanor Whitford crossed the silent gallery in boots, not meant for mud, her lantern dim in the half-light. She could still smell bread from last night, faint and sweet, lingering like a ghost that refused to leave. Jonas was already in the kitchen. He stood near the brick hearth, rolling up his sleeves. His forearms glistened with sweat, though the fire was barely lit. The ring's leather cord still hung around his neck, half hidden by his shirt. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Only the slow hiss of the kettle filled the air. "You came," Jonas said at last, without turning. "I said I would." He nodded. "Then let's begin." He moved to the pantry, grasped the heavy shelf of preserves, and with one effortless motion slid it aside. Eleanor gasped. Behind it, she saw a seam in the wall, a door, invisible unless you were looking straight at it. Jonas pressed against the left side, and the wood groaned softly, revealing a narrow passage cut straight into earth. A breath of cool air drifted up from below, smelling of wet limestone and history. Eleanor lifted her lantern. "My God," she whispered. "Mercier didn't trust banks," Jonas said. "Said they were thieves in waistcoats." He built his own. Stone steps descended in tight spirals, vanishing into darkness. Jonas lit his own lantern, steadier and brighter than hers, and started down. His shadow moved like something ancient. Eleanor hesitated for a heartbeat, then followed. The deeper they went, the cooler it became. Water dripped somewhere beyond sight, a slow rhythm like the ticking of a hidden clock. The air felt older than the house, older than the war with Mexico, older than the state itself. When they reached the bottom, the passage opened into a chamber no bigger than a bedroom. The walls were lined with wooden boxes, some marked with French script, some bound in iron bands now rusted to red-brown lace. Eleanor lifted her lantern higher, and the light struck something that made her breath catch. Coins, dull with age, but unmistakably gold, stacked in small towers along a stone shelf. Jonas set down his lantern. Philippe called it times l'héritage caché *, the hidden inheritance. Brought it out of Haiti after the revolution. $45,000 worth in gold, enough to build or destroy an empire. Eleanor stared, speechless. The weight of the air itself seemed to thicken around her. Her first thought was not of greed, but of the impossible irony, how many lives had been crushed to fill these boxes, and how this fortune, buried beneath her feet, had waited for her husband's ruin to surface. "How long have you known?" she asked finally. "Since the day Mercier left New Orleans. I helped him seal this chamber. He told me to guard it until someone worthy came along." Jonas's voice was steady, but the memory sat heavy in it. "I kept my promise. Why not take it for yourself?" Eleanor's question came out sharper than she intended. "You could have vanished, bought freedom 100 times over." Jonas met her eyes, unflinching. "And then what? Be hunted for gold that wasn't mine? A rich fugitive is still a fugitive. Mercier told me the gold should belong to someone who could use it to build, not just survive. I waited to see if that person would come." He stepped closer, and for the first time she noticed how exhaustion had carved into him. The years of silence, of pretending to be less than he was, it showed in the lines around his eyes. Eleanor turned back to the boxes. The coins gleamed, cold and pure, enough to erase every debt, to restore Rosewood Manor, to give her a life her husband's vanity had taken, enough to damn her in every parlor in Natchez County. "We can use this," she said. "Pay the bank, save the estate." Jonas said nothing. She turned. "You said you'd help me." "I said I'd keep Mercier's trust," he replied. "That means protecting this from everyone, including you, if I have to." The words hit her like a slap. "From me?" Jonas took a long breath. "If you take this gold as a mistress taking her servant's find, it's theft. But if we stand as equals before the law, then it's ours, both of ours." He reached into his pocket, drew out the folded manumission paper she had given him last night, and held it out to her. His hand did not tremble this time. "You want the gold, then you give me something no white man ever has. You give me your name." Eleanor blinked, not understanding. "What?" "Marry me." The words fell between them like thunder. For a heartbeat, she thought she'd misheard, but Jonas's face was grave, his gaze unflinching. "Marry me, Mrs. Whitford. Not for love, God knows the world wouldn't allow that. For survival, the law will protect a husband where it would hang a freed slave. They'll call it scandal, but they'll have to call it legal. You keep your land, I keep my life." Eleanor laughed, short and disbelieving. "That's madness." "Maybe, but the kind that saves lives." She turned away, staring at the gold, her pulse hammered in her ears. "You know what they do to us, to me." "Yes," Jonas said softly, "and I also know what they'll do if you lose this place. They'll take your servants, your home, your dignity. They'll call you pitiful instead of wicked. Which fate do you prefer?" The lantern's flame fluttered as air shifted through the tunnel. In that trembling light, his face looked both defiant and weary, like a soldier asking for a truce he knew would never come. Eleanor felt the world around her tilt. She saw her father's portrait hanging above the parlor fireplace, the proud Colonel Thaddeus G. Whitford, who'd fought in Mexico, who'd built Rosewood with slave labor and silver. She heard her husband's drunken voice calling Jonas, "my best cook and my dumbest investment." She remembered how all of them, men of money, men of name, had buried her in their debts. "What you're asking would destroy us both," she said. Jonas stepped forward until she could see the faint scar beneath his jaw. "Then let it destroy what needs destroying." Eleanor's throat tightened. For the first time, she looked at him not as property or savior, but as a mirror, someone shackled to a world that measured worth in skin and inheritance. "What would we tell them?" she asked. "The truth," he said, almost smiling, "that a widow married her cook. The rest, let gossip invent." Lightning flashed through the narrow gap above the tunnel entrance. For a split second, the chamber glowed as if the earth itself had caught fire. Eleanor's shadow trembled across the stone. She felt the weight of her choice pressing down like the Mississippi sky before rain. "If we do this," she whispered, "you swear the gold is real. Swear it." Jonas untied the leather cord again, pulled out the ring, and held it between them. The silver gleamed, worn smooth by years. "I swear it, on the only man who ever treated me as one." The silence that followed was absolute. Then Eleanor took a step back, steadying herself against the stone wall. "Tomorrow," she said, "Judge Holloway's office. He owes my family a favor. You'll wear my husband's suit." Jonas blinked, almost startled that she had agreed. "Tomorrow," she repeated, her voice steel, "before I lose my nerve or you lose yours." He nodded slowly. "Then tonight I'll make supper fit for a wedding feast." When they climbed back up, the rain had begun. Thunder rolled low across the river flats, and the house shuddered as wind rose. Eleanor paused in the doorway, watching the storm gather. Jonas's footsteps echoed down the corridor toward the kitchen. She pressed her palm against the wall where the hidden door lay sealed behind its shelf. Beneath that thin skin of wood and plaster, the fortune of a dead Frenchman waited, but it was the man who'd revealed it, his impossible proposal, that filled her thoughts. Outside, lightning forked through the clouds. Rosewood Manor's white columns flared ghost-bright against the dark. Somewhere deep inside her, fear began to change its shape, turning into something dangerously close to resolve. Tomorrow, she thought, would be the end of everything the world called decent, and the beginning of something it could never name. The next morning dawned unnaturally quiet, as if the whole county was holding its breath. The storm had broken during the night and left behind a bruised sky, pale light filtering through clouds like smoke. Eleanor Whitford, dressed with care, black silk gown, gloves, and a hat trimmed in modest lace. Widow's attire, respectable armor for the battle she was about to fight. Jonas arrived at the front steps, wearing the dark wool suit that had once belonged to her late husband, Charles. It fit awkwardly across his broad shoulders, the cuffs shortened, the waist strained. Yet in the morning light, he looked not like a servant, but a man who had already decided what kind of history he would leave behind. They said little on the carriage ride into town. Eleanor's hands stayed folded on her lap, the manumission paper resting between them. Jonas drove in silence, his face unreadable, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. Each turn of the wheel felt heavier, as though time itself were resisting the journey. When they reached Judge Marcus Holloway's office, the air inside smelled of ink, old leather, and fear. Holloway was a large man with a face made for disapproval, sagging cheeks, eyes that seemed perpetually wet with disbelief. He looked up as they entered, and the sight of Jonas beside Eleanor made his jowls tremble. "Eleanor Grace Whitford," he said slowly, standing from his desk. "Tell me I'm mistaken about what you intend." "You're not mistaken," she said, her voice even. "We're here for a marriage license. You owe my family that much." The judge's face turned the color of boiled ham. "Marry, you cannot mean—" "I do," she interrupted, producing the papers from her reticule. "The law allows it. You will find no statute forbidding a white widow from marrying a freed man." Jonas stood behind her, silent but immense, his presence bending the air in the small room. "Freed," Holloway barked. "He's about to be," Eleanor cut in. "Manumission is legal and notarized." She slid the document across the desk. "All I need is your signature and a witness." The judge looked from the paper to her face, searching for some trace of madness he could name and thereby dismiss. "Your father saved my life in Monterey," he said finally. "I watched you baptized with my own hands, and you would shame his name like this?" Eleanor's patience snapped like a taut thread. "My father is dead, Marcus, and the men who carry his name now would let his daughter starve before lifting a finger. You want to speak of shame? Try losing everything while men like you look away." The judge swallowed hard, wiping at his forehead with a handkerchief. "Eleanor, this will ruin you. You'll be cast out." "I am already cast out," she said quietly. "All that remains is whether I go down a beggar or a woman with her head held high." Behind her, Jonas spoke for the first time. His voice filled the office, deep and measured like the toll of a church bell. "The law says a man may marry if he is free, and a woman may choose her husband if she is of age. We meet both conditions, Judge. You've always been a man of law. Honor it." Something in Jonas's calm frightened Holloway more than anger ever could. For the first time, the judge truly looked at him not as a servant, but as a man. He sank heavily into his chair, staring at the paper between his hands. "God help you both," he muttered, "because no one else will." The ceremony itself was over, almost before it began. Holloway's young clerk, Timothy, served as witness, his face pale as linen, eyes fixed on the floor. The words were spoken quietly, no flowers, no music, only the dry scratch of the quill as names were written in the registry. Eleanor signed her name in steady, deliberate strokes. Asterisk, Eleanor Grace Whitford. Asterisk. Jonas took the pen next. The clerk's eyes widened as he watched the letters unfold in elegant script times Jonas Mercier Whitford. Asterisk. It was done. The judge's pen clattered onto the desk. "You understand," he said hoarsely, "that the moment this leaves this room, you'll be shunned. There will be no protection for either of you." Eleanor gathered the documents into her reticule. "The law protects us enough." When they stepped outside, sunlight sliced through the thinning clouds. The courthouse steps were slick from rain, the world freshly washed but unchanged. They didn't speak as they descended, maintaining the careful distance of mistress and servant. To anyone watching, it was the same as it had always been, except for the folded paper in her reticule that now made them husband and wife. The carriage ride home was longer. Neither spoke. Each new words would break the fragile spell of calm they had managed to cast around the act. Jonas held the reins loosely, but his jaw was tight. "You look as if you're marching to your own hanging," Eleanor said finally. He gave a short, humorless laugh. "A man like me doesn't need a rope, Mrs. Whitford. He just needs to breathe in the wrong direction." She wanted to tell him not to call her that, not anymore, but the words stuck in her throat. They were still navigating a new world where every word could betray them. When Rosewood Manor came into view, Eleanor felt a tremor of something like grief. The house looked the same, yet she knew it no longer belonged to the same life. The paint flaking from the columns, the sagging porch rails, the empty windows, all of it seemed to watch her with cold amusement. Inside, the silence of the house pressed against her ears. Jonas closed the door softly behind them. "It's done," she said, as if saying it aloud would make it real. "We're married." Jonas turned toward her. "Legally, but not safely." "What now?" she asked. "Now," he said, "I show you what your husband left buried beneath your feet." He moved to the kitchen and pushed aside the shelf that concealed the hidden door. Eleanor followed, her lantern in hand. This time, she didn't hesitate. The descent was the same, but the air felt heavier. When they reached the chamber, Jonas lifted the lantern and set it upon one of the boxes. The gold gleamed again, this time brighter than before, the coins catching light like living fire. "This is what you've risked everything for," Jonas said quietly. "Enough to buy a kingdom, and enough to get us both killed." Eleanor stepped forward, her hand trembling as she traced the edge of one of the boxes. "Then we'll use it carefully. No one must know." Jonas nodded. "A little at a time. Sell what you can as jewelry. Pretend it's your husband's inheritance. Let them gossip but not suspect." She turned to him, her expression softening for the first time. "And you?" "I keep the secret," he said. "I keep you safe. That's the bargain." Something in his tone silenced her. It wasn't servitude, it was partnership disguised as loyalty. They stood there a long while, surrounded by gold and shadow, two conspirators bound by necessity and something unspoken. Above them, thunder rolled away toward the river, taking with it the last remnants of innocence. When they finally climbed back up into the kitchen, Eleanor felt the world had shifted on its axis. She had entered that tunnel a widow and come out something else, entirely something the world had no word for yet. Jonas placed a single gold coin on the kitchen table between them. "For the bank," he said. "Start small. The rest stays buried until it's safe." Eleanor picked up the coin, felt its weight heavier than sin, lighter than freedom. "Tomorrow," she said, "I'll begin." Jonas nodded. "And tonight?" "Tonight," she whispered. "We pray the world stays blind for one more day." Outside, the last of the rain tapped against the window panes like quiet applause. Inside, two outlaws of society stood together beneath the same roof, their futures tied to secrets older and more dangerous than love. Rosewood Manor had witnessed births, deaths, and countless bargains, but never one like this. Night settled over Rosewood Manor like a velvet shroud, heavy and waiting. The cicadas had fallen silent, replaced by the slow, rhythmic chirp of crickets in the wet grass. Somewhere down by the river, a whippoorwill called, its mournful cry echoing through the cypress trees. Inside the manor, a single lamp glowed in the kitchen window. Jonas stood at the hearth, his sleeves rolled to the elbows, the muscles in his forearms gleaming with sweat. He was kneading bread dough as if the motion itself might calm the thoughts raging in his mind. Each press of his hands into the pliant surface carried the weight of 6 years of obedience, patience, and careful restraint. He'd waited longer than most men would have survived, waited for a reason, for a sign that the promise he'd made to Philippe Mercier hadn't been in vain. And now that reason stood in the doorway, barefoot, her silk gown exchanged for a simple cotton robe. "Can't sleep?" he asked without turning. Eleanor shook her head. "No, the house feels alive tonight." Jonas smiled faintly. "It always does before a change." She crossed the kitchen floor, her bare feet soundless on the boards. On the table lay the gold coin he'd given her that morning, its edges dulled by time, but its weight undeniable. She picked it up, turning it between her fingers. $45,000, she murmured. "Enough to rebuild this entire parish, enough to burn it down." Jonas's hands stilled on the dough. "Depends who holds it." Eleanor set the coin down carefully, then walked to the hidden wall. "Tell me more about him, about Mercier." Jonas wiped his hands, then leaned against the counter, his face illuminated by the soft orange light of the fire. "Philippe was a strange man," he began. "Born in Bordeaux, educated in Paris. He came to Haiti when the revolution was already tearing the island apart, said he wanted to witness the world being reborn." Jonas paused. He didn't expect the new world to drown in blood. He lost everything there, his wife, his plantation, even his faith. But he carried one thing away from that fire, the belief that money, properly hidden, could one day free people rather than bind them. Eleanor frowned. "He thought gold could buy freedom." "No," Jonas said. "He thought it could protect those trying to reach it. He told me once, every empire buries its crimes. If you dig deep enough, you'll find gold, and behind it, ghosts." The fire popped in the hearth, scattering sparks up the chimney. "So he brought that gold here," Eleanor said, "and buried it beneath this house." Jonas nodded. "Bought the property through a proxy, hid the gold before the sale. When your husband purchased Rosewood, he bought a tomb without knowing it." Eleanor crossed her arms, her mind spinning. "He must have trusted you beyond reason." "He trusted me because I had nothing left to lose," Jonas said simply. and because I could keep silent. They both fell quiet. The room seemed to shrink around them, the flicker of lamplight breathing against the walls. Finally, Eleanor spoke. "You said the gold would destroy us if we used it wrong. What did you mean?" Jonas looked toward the window, his reflection dim in the glass. Mercier wasn't the only one who knew. There were men, white men, who helped him move it from Haiti. Merchants, planters, men of means. Some are still alive. If they ever learn the gold survived, they'll come for it, for us. Eleanor's stomach tightened. So we're not just hiding money, we're hiding history. Jonas's eyes met hers, calm and unwavering. Exactly. The two of them stood there, bound by the weight of the secret beneath their feet. In that moment, the distance between them, one defined by centuries of law and blood, narrowed into something small, dangerous, and unspoken. Eleanor broke the silence first. "I want to see it again." Jonas hesitated. "Tonight?" She nodded. "If it's ours now, I should learn every shadow of it." Without another word, he took up a lantern and moved to the pantry. The shelf slid aside with the soft groan of wood against stone. Together, they descended into the cool breath of the earth. The chamber looked different this time. The gold gleamed brighter, or perhaps her eyes had learned how to see it. The coins weren't just metal, they were echoes, stamped with empires that had risen and fallen. Spanish escudos, French louis d'or, American eagles. Each coin bore the face of a monarch or a republic long dead. Eleanor knelt beside one of the boxes and brushed away a layer of dust. "You could buy back this entire county," she whispered. Jonas crouched beside her, and still not by peace. Something about the way he said it quiet, certain, made her glance at him. His expression was unreadable, but there was weariness there, the kind that came from a lifetime of being reminded where he did and did not belong. She rose slowly, brushing dirt from her hands. "Mercier trusted you. I will too." He looked up at her then, the lantern's light catching his eyes. "Trust is a dangerous thing in this house." Eleanor smiled faintly. "So is silence." He huffed a quiet laugh, one that vanished as quickly as it came. Then he turned serious again. "We'll need to be careful. Sell the gold piece by piece, small trades. You'll say they came from your husband's estate. Men will believe it. They always believe widows find hidden treasures among their husbands' things." She nodded. "And you?" "I'll keep the rest hidden. Guard it." He paused. "Guard you." The air between them thickened. Eleanor felt something shift inside her, something that had been locked behind fear and propriety for months. The smell of damp earth, the echo of their footsteps, the shared secret between them, it all blurred the line between necessity and something perilously close to tenderness. She turned away quickly. Then it's decided. When they climbed back into the kitchen, dawn was beginning to touch the horizon. The first light of morning filtered through the lace curtains, painting faint bars of gold across the floorboards. Jonas set down the lantern. "You should rest. Today will be long." "I don't think I'll sleep again for a long time," Eleanor said, her voice barely above a whisper. Jonas studied her, then nodded once. "Then we'll work instead." That always helped Mercier forget the weight of the world. She smiled faintly, though her hands still trembled. "Jonas, thank you." He shook his head. "Don't thank me yet." When he left, Eleanor sat alone in the kitchen for a long while, listening to the faint creak of the house around her, the settling beams, the restless wind, the distant hum of life returning to the fields. Underneath it all, she could almost hear it, the faint pulse of gold sleeping beneath her floors, as if the manor itself had a heartbeat once more. But neither she nor Jonas knew that in Natchez County, walls had ears and loyalty had limits. Already, the first whispers were beginning to spread, whispers that would soon grow into a storm. By mid-July, the air itself had turned against them. It hung heavy with gnats and rumor, every gust of wind carrying the scent of magnolia and malice. Rosewood Manor, once the pride of Natchez County, now stood like a watchtower surrounded by gossip that moved faster than the river current. It started with glances. The grocer's wife stopped offering credit. The blacksmith pretended not to see Eleanor's carriage when she passed through town. Women who once invited her to tea now crossed to the other side of the street, whispering behind gloved hands. "Widow Whitford's gone queer," someone murmured at the market. "She keeps her cook too close." "Too close," another replied. "He's practically running that house. Mark my words, she'll regret it." Within days, words became stories, each retelling darker than the last. They said Jonas had bewitched her with island charms, that he'd buried her husband's bones beneath the magnolias, that he'd hidden Haitian voodoo gold under her floors. In a county that fed on scandal, truth was the least important ingredient. Eleanor heard the whispers even before they reached her door. She saw them in the way the mail stopped arriving, in the sidelong looks of field hands who feared being seen speaking to her, in the silence that followed her carriage wheels down Main Street. "Let them talk," she told Jonas one evening as they worked in the kitchen, weighing coins and sealing them into small pouches. "Words can't hurt us." Jonas didn't look up from his work. "In this place, words build gallows." She stopped. "You think they'd?" He glanced up, eyes steady. "They've done worse for less." The truth was, he had already noticed things she hadn't. The same two men loitering near the front gate 3 days in a row. The preacher's wife peering through her curtains when Eleanor passed by. A letter torn from the manor door, its wax seal broken before it reached her hand. But he said nothing of these. Fear only grows when fed, and Eleanor was already fighting too many shadows. That Sunday, she decided to face them. "I'm going to church," she said, fastening her black gloves. Jonas straightened from where he was polishing the silver. "You'll be walking into a pit of snakes. Then I'll look them in the eye while they strike." He exhaled slowly. "I'll drive you, but I'm not stepping inside." She nodded once, grateful and defiant all at once. The carriage wheels crunched over the gravel drive. Townsfolk along the road paused to watch. The sight of the widow's carriage drawn by her own servant was entertainment enough for a summer morning. Children stared. Men doffed their hats with mocking politeness. Women pulled their parasols closer, as if shame were contagious. When the carriage stopped before Natchez First Presbyterian, the congregation was already assembled outside. Reverend Clayton stood at the top of the steps, his Bible clutched like a weapon. Eleanor descended slowly, her head held high. She could feel their eyes like nettles against her skin. Jonas remained by the carriage, his posture straight, his hands folded. The perfect servant, invisible and unbreakable. As Eleanor climbed the steps, the murmurs began thin at first, then rising like the hiss of locusts. "She's really come. After what she's done?" Poor thing's lost her mind. Eleanor ignored them all. She entered the church and walked the full length of the aisle. Every pew she passed emptied of whispers and filled with judgment. She took her family's old seat, the third row on the right, where her mother had once fanned herself and hummed along to hymns. The sermon that morning was on Times, the sin of pride. Asterisk. Reverend Clayton's voice boomed against the rafters, his words chosen like arrows. "Some among us," he declared, "believe themselves wiser than God's own order. They think to blur the lines he set between master and servant, between light and shadow." Every gaze in the church turned toward her. Eleanor kept her chin high, her hands lay still on her lap, though her nails bit into her gloves. When the service ended, she rose and walked out in silence. No one spoke to her, no one dared touch her. The doors of the church opened, and sunlight spilled across her face like judgment itself. Outside, Jonas was waiting. Their eyes met for the briefest second, a flash of shared endurance. "How bad?" he asked quietly as she climbed into the carriage. "Worse than I imagined," she said, "but I survived." He nodded once, flicking the reins. "Then we start counting the days until they stop talking." But the county had no intention of stopping. By Tuesday, their chicken coop was found burned. By Thursday, a crude message appeared on the front gate painted in red, letters dripping down the wood. Asterisk, asterisk, race traitor, asterisk, asterisk. Eleanor scrubbed it off herself, her hands blistering from lye. "Let me," Jonas said, stepping forward. "No," she snapped, her voice like flint. "They want me to hide. They want me to be ashamed. I won't." Jonas studied her, something like admiration flickering in his eyes. "You've more courage than most generals." "I have more to lose," she replied. The attacks grew bolder. Someone shot at the carriage one evening as they returned from town. The bullet splintered a wheel, spoke and vanished into the night. The dogs barked for hours afterward, restless and uneasy. That night, Eleanor stood at her bedroom window, watching the moonlight silver the cotton fields. Below, Jonas walked the grounds with his rifle slung across his back, a silhouette cut from iron. For the first time since her husband's death, she felt the strange, steady comfort of being protected, not as a mistress, but as an equal in danger. The world beyond Rosewood was changing. There were whispers of new laws in Washington, of free states rising in the north, but here, in Mississippi, time moved like tar. Men clung to the old order with bloodied hands, and in the dark heart of that order, a widow and a former slave had joined themselves in defiance of everything the South believed sacred. The county would not forgive. It would not forget. By the end of the week, the first stone came through the parlor window wrapped in paper, tied with twine, carrying 3 words in crude ink. Asterisk, asterisk. You'll hang too. Asterisk, asterisk. The glass shattered. The note fell at her feet, and Eleanor Whitford knew the storm had truly begun. The next few days unfolded with a cruel rhythm. Morning brought silence, noon brought whispers, and by nightfall the air itself seemed to tremble with malice. Even the servants at Rosewood Manor moved quietly now, afraid to look their mistress in the eye. Fear had become a tenant in the house, unseen, but always present. Jonas noticed first. "They're watching the road," he said one evening, setting his rifle beside the kitchen table. "Every night, same 2 riders, keeping just far enough away they think we don't see." Eleanor stirred her tea, pretending calm. "Let them watch. There's nothing here worth stealing." Jonas's gaze was sharp. "There's plenty here worth killing." Her hand stilled on the spoon. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. The following morning, she insisted on going into town herself against Jonas's advice. She had debts to manage, supplies to buy, appearances to maintain. To vanish would only confirm the rumors. When the carriage rolled through Natchez Square, every sound seemed louder. The clop of hooves on cobblestones, the creak of the wheels, the whisper of skirts as women turned away. The blacksmith paused mid-swing, hammer suspended above an anvil. Children fell silent. At the general store, the clerk, young, nervous, wouldn't meet her gaze. He pushed her purchases across the counter as though her touch might stain them. As she left, she caught sight of Thomas Sutherland, leaning against a hitching post, hat tipped low, the smirk of a man savoring scandal. He was wealthy, loud, and cruel, a man her late husband had once called a friend. "Morning, Mrs. Whitford," he drawled. "Or should I say, Mrs. Jonas?" The words froze her mid-step. He grinned wider. "Didn't think we'd find out, did you? The judge's clerk likes whiskey more than secrets, words spreading faster than the river after rain." Eleanor drew herself up. "Mind your tongue, Mr. Sutherland. Hard to mind what's already the talk of every porch in Natchez." He stepped closer. "A white woman married to her cook. Lord, you do know how to entertain the county." She held his gaze. "You'll address me with respect, sir." "Respect?" His eyes gleamed. "Respect is earned, not bought with gold or sin." Eleanor didn't flinch. "Then perhaps you'll earn some yourself before the Lord finds you wanting." The remark wiped the smile from his face. For a heartbeat, something ugly flickered there, pride, wounded and vengeful. He tipped his hat mockingly and walked away, but Eleanor could feel his eyes on her long after he was gone. That night, Jonas found her pacing the parlor, fists clenched. "He knows," she said. "Sutherland, he knows about the marriage." Jonas didn't ask how. "Then it's begun," he murmured. "What do we do?" "Prepare," he said simply. "Keep the rifle loaded. Don't go anywhere alone. And if you see men gathering near the gate, don't argue, run." She looked at him, fear flickering behind her defiance. "Run where? This is my home." He met her gaze evenly. "No home is worth dying for." But even he must have known the futility of the warning. For Eleanor Whitford, Rosewood was more than a house, it was the last piece of her name. By Sunday, the town was boiling. Reverend Clayton's sermon that morning had been a performance of righteous fury. He never said her name, but every word struck home. "There are those," he thundered, "who would unmake the natural order of creation, who would mix what God divided, defy what heaven decreed. The wages of sin are not merely death, they are disgrace." The congregation roared its approval, and by the time Eleanor's carriage reached the church steps, she could feel the stares cutting through her veil. Jonas stayed with the horses, as he always did. She walked alone into the lion's den. Inside, silence rippled outward from her like a chill. The faithful moved aside, unwilling to brush against her skirts. Even the choir faltered mid-hymn as she passed. Eleanor sat in the third pew, head held high, her hymn book unopened. She listened as the preacher spat venom disguised as virtue, and she sang not a word. When the final prayer was spoken, she rose and walked out through the center aisle, spine straight, eyes steady. Not one soul offered her a hand. Jonas was waiting by the carriage. He didn't speak until they were well down the road. "How bad?" "Worse," she said. "And you were right. Words build gallows." That evening, as twilight thickened over the cotton fields, Eleanor and Jonas sat in the study reviewing the plantation ledgers. A sudden pounding at the front door shattered the calm. Jonas was on his feet instantly, rifle in hand. Eleanor froze. The pounding came again, heavier this time, insistent. "Stay here," Jonas said. He opened the door to find Thomas Sutherland standing on the porch, flanked by 3 other men, all armed. Their faces glowed orange in the lantern light. "Evening, Whitford," Sutherland said, though his eyes flicked to Jonas with venom. "We've come for a friendly word." Eleanor appeared behind Jonas before he could stop her. "Mr. Sutherland," she said coldly, "if you have business with me, state it. Otherwise, get off my property." Sutherland smirked. "Business, yes. See, the town's concerned. A lady of your standing caught up in such unholy arrangements. We think maybe your cook here's been taking advantage of your grief." Jonas's grip tightened on the rifle. "Leave, Sutherland." "Or what?" the man sneered. "You'll shoot. Go ahead, boy. Give us the excuse." Eleanor stepped forward, fury blazing in her eyes. "If you call him boy again on my land, I'll have you charged for trespass." Sutherland's smile turned cruel. "You think the sheriff will take your side, widow, or your husband's?" Lightning flashed in the distance, blue, sharp, silent. Jonas lifted the rifle slightly, not quite aiming, but close enough. "I said leave." The barrel caught the light. The men froze. Then Sutherland's grin faltered. "Careful now," he said, his tone suddenly wary. "You don't want to start something you can't finish." Jonas's voice was calm, even. "Then go before I decide to finish it anyway." For a long moment, the night held its breath. Then Sutherland spat into the dirt and turned away. "Enjoy your evening, Mrs. Whitford. It may be your last one in this house." They rode off, the sound of hooves fading into the dark. Eleanor closed the door with trembling hands. The silence afterward felt heavier than the confrontation itself. Jonas lowered the rifle. "That shot would have bought us a week of peace, maybe less." Eleanor met his eyes. "Then we'll spend the week wisely." He gave a short, grim nod. "By the next Sunday, they'll come in numbers. I can feel it." Outside, thunder rolled again, closer this time. The wind carried the smell of rain and something else, smoke, faint and cruel, from some fire already burning too near. Jonas moved to the window and watched the darkness gathering at the edges of the property. "They won't stop," he said softly, "not until one of us is gone." Eleanor joined him, her reflection trembling beside his in the glass. "Then let it be them." And as the storm broke over Rosewood Manor, lightning flooding the fields with silver fire, neither of them looked away from the road that led into town because both knew, before the week was out, it would carry something far worse than rain. The rain held off for 5 days, as if the sky itself were waiting. The air turned thick with the smell of iron and pine sap, the kind of stillness that always came before destruction. Every night, Jonas walked the perimeter of the estate, rifle slung over his shoulder, the dogs pacing at his heels. Every night, Eleanor sat awake in the upstairs parlor, the lamp turned low, her fingers tracing the edge of the gold coin on the table, like a charm against fear. They both knew the town's patience had run out. It began on a Saturday evening, just after dusk. The house was half shadow and half lantern light, a hush lying over it so deep that even the frogs by the river held their tongues. Eleanor was in the study, going over the ledgers again, though the numbers meant nothing now. Jonas was in the kitchen, sharpening the blade of a small hunting knife. Then came the sound, the first shattering of glass. She rose at once. Another crash followed, then another. Downstairs, Jonas dropped the knife and ran. When Eleanor reached the parlor, she saw the floor littered with shards, a rock lying amid the wreckage. A note was tied to it with twine, the paper streaked by rain. In thick, clumsy letters, someone had written, "Tonight we cleanse the sin." Jonas's eyes found hers, grim and steady. "They're coming." As if on cue, dogs began barking in the distance, first one, then a chorus, rising with the rhythm of hoofbeats. Eleanor's voice was barely a whisper. "How many?" Jonas crossed to the window. Lanterns moved along the road like a procession of angry stars. "Too many," he said. She took a breath. "Then we make them earn it." They barred the doors first. Jonas dragged a heavy oak table against the front entry. Eleanor gathered pistols from her husband's old chest upstairs, two loaded, one half rusted. Her hands shook, but her eyes did not. "Mrs. Whitford," Jonas said when she came down the stairs, "you get behind me, and you stay there." "Don't call me that," she snapped. "Not tonight." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Eleanor, then." Thunder rumbled somewhere deep and low. The wind carried the smell of smoke long before the first torch came into view. Outside, voices called out, ugly and sure of themselves. "Bring out the witch. Bring out the N-dot. Or burn the house clean." Jonas took a slow breath, steadying himself. "When they break the door, go upstairs. Lock yourself in. If you hear gunfire, don't come down." She stared at him. "And if you fall, then you run." He didn't wait for her answer. He moved to the front hall, planted his feet, and leveled the rifle. The door shuddered under the first blow, then another. On the third, it burst inward, the hinges screaming. Light and chaos poured through. Men in work coats and masks surged into the hall, torches in hand. The rifle cracked. One man dropped instantly. Another screamed as the torch he carried fell, setting the drapes ablaze. The smell of burning fabric filled the house. Eleanor fled to the stairs, turning back only once to see Jonas fire again, the muzzle flashing in the dark. Then the crowd overtook him, half a dozen men at once, striking with clubs and fists. "Jonas!" she screamed. He disappeared beneath them. Eleanor ran to the bedroom, slamming the door behind her. She could hear the chaos below, the crash of furniture, the roar of fire, the guttural shouts of men drunk on hate. She loaded the pistol with shaking hands, her breath coming in gasps. When the door burst open, it was Thomas Sutherland who stood there, blood trickling down his temple where she'd struck him once before. His face was wild, fevered, but his voice came out smooth as oil. "There you are," he said. "You don't have to die for this mistake, Eleanor. Say he forced you. Say he tricked you. The judge will annul it. You can still come back." She raised the pistol. "Get out." He laughed. "You'd shoot me? You? The Lady of Rosewood?" "I already have," she said, and pulled the trigger. The shot tore through his shoulder. He fell against the doorframe with a sound that was half snarl, half disbelief. Blood bloomed across his vest. Eleanor stepped forward, the pistol shaking in her grip. "Next time I don't miss." Sutherland stumbled backward, clutching his wound, rage twisting his face. He shouted something to the men below, but his words blurred with the roar of the fire. Eleanor ran to the landing. The front hall was a storm of motion flames licking the curtains, smoke billowing toward the ceiling. Jonas was on his knees, his face bloodied, surrounded by armed men. "Let him go," she screamed, leveling the pistol. Every rifle in the room turned toward her. Deputy Coleman, pale and sweating, stepped forward. "Put the gun down, Eleanor," he said. "Nobody wants to hurt you." "You already have," she said. "Now move." "Eleanor," he pleaded, "be reasonable. You can't win this." "Reasonable?" Her voice cracked. "You call this reasonable?" She cocked the pistol. "The next man who takes a step dies." The room went still. The fire crackled, throwing long orange shadows across the walls. Then Sutherland appeared at the bottom of the stairs, blood on his arm, hatred in his eyes. "You're both finished," he spat. "You think that paper makes you man and wife? You think the law cares? It's filth, both of you." Eleanor's voice was ice. "We're married before God and the law. The only filth here is what you've brought into my house." Sutherland sneered. "Then in it." He raised his pistol. Jonas Lunget. The shot went wide, splintering the banister beside Eleanor. Jonas tackled Sutherland, the two men crashing into the burning curtains. The fire flared bright as their bodies struggled within it. A second shot rang out, then a third. Eleanor screamed his name. When the smoke cleared, Sutherland was on the floor, motionless, his pistol fallen beside him. Jonas stood swaying, a dark stain spreading across his shoulder, his chest rising and falling in ragged bursts. The mob froze, too shocked to move. Jonas turned, eyes blazing in the firelight. "Get out," he growled, voice deep and terrible. "Every one of you." Deputy Coleman was the first to move. "This ain't right," he muttered. "Come on." One by one, the men backed out, dragging their wounded and their dead. Outside, the rain finally began thick, cold, merciless. Eleanor dropped the pistol and ran to Jonas. He caught her as she fell against him, both of them coughing from smoke and exhaustion. "They'll come back," she whispered. "I know." His voice was faint, but steady. "And when they do, we'll be gone." The fire was spreading too fast now. Flames licked the wallpaper, devouring the wood like paper. Jonas led her toward the back hall, half carrying her as they stumbled through the smoke. Behind them, Rosewood Manor burned, its grand columns glowing orange against the night sky, the death of a house, the death of a name. Outside, rain hissed against the blaze. Eleanor turned once, tears cutting streaks through the soot on her face. "This was my home," she whispered. Jonas squeezed her hand. "Then let's make a new one." They ran toward the river, the night alive with thunder and fire and the terrible beauty of things ending. By dawn, Rosewood Manor was a blackened skeleton. Smoke coiled upward from the ruins, and ash fell softly over the wet fields like grey snow. The smell of burned wood and old secrets hung in the air. From the road, no one could tell where the parlour had been, or the dining room, or the grand stair that once held Eleanor Whitford's footsteps. All of it had collapsed into silence. They had escaped before the roof caved in. The rain had hidden their tracks, washing away blood and footprints alike. For hours they lay hidden among the reeds by the riverbank, breath shallow, listening to the distant murmur of men shouting over what remained of the house. When the voices faded and the storm moved on, Jonas finally spoke. "They'll say we're dead," he said. "Let them." Eleanor's throat burned from smoke and grief. "And if they come looking, they'll dig through ash and find nothing but bones of the house." His eyes met hers. "But if you go back, if you walk into town, they'll need a story that fits their world. Give it to them." She shook her head. "I won't lie." He almost smiled. "You will, because it's the only way either of us lives." They stayed hidden until nightfall, when the fires had cooled to embers. Then they crept back up the rise, following the curve of the river toward what was left of Rosewood. The sight of it stopped Eleanor in her tracks. The columns had fallen. The gallery roof collapsed inward. The windows were empty sockets staring out over acres of blackened ruin. It was a graveyard now, one that smelled of smoke and iron and the faint sweetness of scorched magnolia. Jonas's hand rested gently on her shoulder. "We can't stay here." But she couldn't move. "My family built this house with hands that weren't their own," she said softly, "and now it's those same hands that have destroyed it." He looked at her for a long time. "Maybe that's justice." For a moment, neither spoke. Then Eleanor took a deep breath and turned toward the west field, where the tunnel entrance lay, hidden beneath what had once been the kitchen. The shelf was gone, burned away. Only the black outline of stone remained. "Jonas," she said, alarm rising in her voice. "The gold." He shook his head before she could finish. "It's gone." She stared at him. "What do you mean gone?" "I flooded the chamber," he said. 3 days ago, when you said you thought someone had been in the house. I opened the spring pipe. The whole vault's underwater now." She could barely find her breath. "You destroyed it?" "I kept my promise," he replied. "I protected it from them, from greed, from all of us. They'll dig for years and find nothing but mud." Eleanor turned away, covering her mouth to stop a sound that was half sob, half laughter. "So, we've lost everything." Jonas stepped closer. "We've lost nothing that mattered." But she couldn't believe that, not yet. The ashes of Rosewood still smoked behind her. She could still see her mother's mirror shattered in the mud. The carved banister burned black. "We need to go," Jonas said again, more firmly this time. "You can't be found here. They'll say you were mad, bewitched. They'll say, I forced you. Let them. Tomorrow you'll go to Judge Holloway. You'll tell him you were deceived, that I lied about the gold, tricked you into marriage. You'll ask for annulment." Eleanor turned on him. "No. After all we've done, after all we've survived, you want me to undo it, to call you a criminal?" "I want you alive," Jonas said quietly. The rain started again, soft this time, washing the soot from his face. His voice stayed calm, but she could hear what it cost him. "They'll believe you," he said. "They want to. It lets them keep their world the way it was. You'll have your home rebuilt, your debts forgiven, and he hesitated. "I'll be gone." "Gone where?" He didn't answer. "Jonas," she said, stepping closer. "Where will you go?" "Down," he said simply. "The tunnels aren't gone. Not all of them. There's a second passage near the spring. Mercier built it for escape. I can live there until they stop looking." "In the dark," she whispered, like an animal. "In the dark," he said, like a man waiting for his time. She reached for him then, instinctively, her hand brushing the rough edge of his sleeve. "I can't." He caught her wrist gently. "You can. You have to. I'll come back when it's safe." The night pressed in around them. From the direction of town came the faint toll of a church bell marking midnight, each chime falling like a countdown. At last she nodded, her voice breaking. "Then tomorrow, I'll make them believe the lie. Jonas's expression softened. That's my Eleanor, he said quietly, sharp as a blade and twice as dangerous. When he smiled, she realized she might never see it again. Before dawn, they made their way to the old smokehouse near the back of the property. Jonas pried open a section of the floorboards, revealing the narrow mouth of the secondary tunnel. It yawned like an old wound in the earth. Eleanor crouched beside it, clutching his hand one last time. How will I know you're alive? He pressed the leather pouch into her palm, the one that had always hung around his neck. Inside was the silver ring, the words times liberté, égalité, fraternité * worn almost smooth. When the river rises next spring, he said, and you still have this, you'll know I made it through the winter. She wanted to tell him she couldn't live without him, that she'd rather die than lie. But she'd seen too much fire to waste courage on words. Instead, she nodded. Then I'll wait for the thaw. He smiled once more, then descended into the dark. The earth swallowed him whole, leaving nothing but silence and rain. When the first light of morning touched the fields, Eleanor walked down the muddy road toward town. Her clothes were torn, her skin smeared with soot. She looked like the ghost of the woman she had been. Judge Holloway was already at his desk when she entered his office, his face pale with exhaustion. He rose at once, relief and reproach mingling in his voice. Eleanor, thank the Lord you're alive. We thought you'd burned what happened. She sank into the chair opposite him, lowering her eyes. Madness, she said softly. All of it. He lied to me, Marcus. He told me there was gold, promised salvation, and I believed him. But it was all a trick. He wanted freedom, and her voice caught. I was a fool. The judge's expression shifted from pity to grim satisfaction. I warned you, he said. The law can't protect you from your own folly, but I'll see to it that this mistake is erased. He pushed a document toward her, an annulment petition. Say the words publicly, and I'll sign it before sundown. Eleanor took the pen with shaking fingers. Thank you, she whispered. When she left an hour later, the lie was written into law. By nightfall, the story had spread through Natchez. The widow Whitford, deceived by a clever servant who'd stolen her heart and her fortune, now set free from disgrace. The county exhaled in relief, its order restored. Only Eleanor knew the truth that beneath the ashes of Rosewood, a man still breathed in the dark, guarding a dream older than gold. That night, alone in her empty house, she lit a single candle and held the silver ring to the flame. Its shadow wavered on the wall like the ghost of a promise. I lied for us, she whispered into the dark. Now live for me. Outside, the wind rustled through the blackened oaks, carrying the smell of smoke, river water, and something faintly sweet, like hope, that refused to die. Weeks passed. Autumn crept into Mississippi, soft and deceptive, the kind of season that covered scars with gold leaves and told people lies about healing. The town of Natchez settled back into its rhythm, pretending nothing had happened. Men tipped their hats again when Eleanor passed, though none dared look her in the eye. Women whispered in parlors, pity mixing with quiet triumph. The fallen lady restored, the scandal erased. Rosewood Manor was a ruin, but its mistress still walked upright. And that, somehow, unsettled them more than her disgrace ever had. She played her part to perfection. Each morning, she visited the bank. Each Sunday, she sat in the second pew, not the Whitford pew, that would have been too bold, and bowed her head when Reverend Clayton spoke of repentance. She sold jewelry from her late husband's collection. Gold melted down and recast from the fortune below. Her debts vanished piece by piece, as did suspicion. But every night, after the house was quiet and the servants asleep, she walked to the pantry door, lit a single candle, and pressed her hand against the stones. It was the same gesture every time, like knocking on a grave to be sure it still answered. Sometimes she thought she heard movement below, faint scraping, water dripping, the shift of earth. Once, she even swore she heard humming low and tuneless, like a man at work far underground. She didn't know if it was real, or if her heart had simply begun to invent him to keep from breaking. Then, one night, their times was time's a sign. She found a scrap of parchment on the kitchen table when she came down at dawn, her handwriting knife steady, her mind still fogged from dreams. It wasn't hers. It was Jonas's. The words were written in his careful, deliberate script. Is greater than, do not come down for a while, they're still watching, and is greater than, the river is high, but the walls hold. is greater than tell no one, is greater than J. Eleanor pressed the note to her chest and sank into a chair, shaking with relief and something like fear. He was alive, but he was close, too close, and if he could reach the surface, so could danger. 3 days later, that danger arrived. It came in the form of Thomas Sutherland's widow, Clara, a woman sharp as vinegar and twice as cruel. She arrived in a morning gown blacker than sin and demanded tea. Eleanor, ever the actress, obliged. Clara's eyes wandered the ruined walls, the patched windows, the burned-out scent that no rain could erase. "My husband died here," she said finally, her tone too calm. "They said the fire killed him, but the wounds on his body told another story." Eleanor's pulse faltered. "You're mistaken. The flames." "Don't play the innocent," Clara cut in. "He came here to reason with you. Instead, he was shot. I've seen the mark. Powder burns, close range. From your Times pistol." The silence was heavy enough to crush the air between them. Eleanor didn't deny it. "He broke into my home," she said. "He threatened me." Clara's lips curled. "He times warn, times you. There's a difference." She leaned forward, voice dropping. "People in town think you've paid your debts rather fast for a widow with no fortune. They're starting to ask questions. About you, about the gold." Eleanor forced her expression to remain still. "Rumors, nothing more." Clara's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Rumors have teeth. Be careful they don't bite." When the widow left, Eleanor stood at the window for a long time, staring at the road. Dust trailed behind Clara's carriage like a ribbon of smoke. By nightfall, Eleanor was back at the pantry wall. This time she didn't hesitate. She pressed the stone, heard the soft click, and slipped inside with the candle. The tunnel air was cool and damp. She descended the steps, her heartbeat echoing louder than her shoes. "Jonas," she whispered. No answer. She reached the bottom, lifted the lantern, and froze. The vault chamber was half flooded, water shining black in the candlelight. The gold boxes still stood in neat rows, some toppled, some open, and on one of them sat Jonas, alive. His hair was longer, his face leaner, but his eyes, those dark, unreadable eyes, still carried that same calm gravity. "You shouldn't be here," he said quietly. "You left me a note," she said, breathless. "I thought I needed to see the floodlines. The water's rising faster than I thought, the springs shifting." He looked at her then, really looked. "You've been in danger, haven't you?" She hesitated. "Sutherland's widow came, she suspects." Jonas's jaw tightened. "Then we leave, tonight." Eleanor shook her head. "Not yet. If I disappear now, it proves her right. But there's something else, Jonas." She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "Do you remember the journals you found? Mercier's records?" He nodded. "I've been reading them. There are names, powerful ones. Southern men, politicians. If the truth of that gold ever came to light, it wouldn't just ruin them. It would destroy everything they built." Jonas frowned. "That's exactly why it can't come to light. But don't you see, that's the leverage. That's what can keep us safe." He stared at her, torn between admiration and fear. "You're starting to sound like Mercier." "Maybe he wasn't wrong," she said softly. For a long time, they stood in silence, the candlelight trembling between them. Then Jonas stepped forward and took her hand. "We survive first," he said, "then we decide what to do with history." Above them, thunder cracked again, not from a storm this time, but from something heavier, closer. Eleanor looked up at the ceiling of earth. What was that? Jonas's face darkened. Not thunder. A second blast sounded distant but unmistakable. Gunpowder. Voices echoed faintly down the tunnel, men shouting, boots on wood. "They've come back," Jonas said. "They're digging." He grabbed Eleanor's arm. "Go now." She hesitated, torn between fear and fury. "If they find this place." "They won't," he said, "because I won't let them." Eleanor's eyes widened. "Jonas, no." But he was already moving toward the far end of the vault, where the escape tunnel wound upward toward the spring. He turned once, candlelight catching the silver ring in her hand. "Remember what I told you," he said. "Springtime." And then he was gone, swallowed by the dark, leaving her alone amid the gold and the rising sound of men breaking through the world above. The noise above grew louder, boots striking floorboards, shovels biting into earth, voices barking orders through the cracks of history itself. Eleanor could hear it all from below, each sound rolling through the tunnel walls like thunder in a coffin. She stood frozen beside the half-flooded vault, the candle trembling in her hand, Jonas's words still echoing in her head. Asterisk, springtime. Asterisk, but spring felt a lifetime away. She turned toward the stairs leading up to the kitchen passage, her dress heavy with damp soil, her heart thudding so hard it hurt. Then came the sharp crack of splintering wood. Someone had found the outer seam of the pantry wall. They were almost inside. Eleanor blew out the candle, plunging herself into blackness. The sound of dripping water became deafening. She clutched the silver ring around her neck and began to move, inch by inch, her hands guiding her along the cold stone, until she reached the second passage, the one Jonas had disappeared through. She didn't call out. She didn't dare. But she whispered his name once, softly enough that only ghosts could have heard it. The tunnel forked ahead. One path led toward the river, the other toward the spring and to Jonas. From the fork, she could see the faint glow of torches bleeding through cracks in the wall. The men were close, and then she heard it, the unmistakable hiss of a fuse. God, she breathed, realization cutting through terror. They weren't digging. They were times blasting. Asterisk. Eleanor ran. She followed the right-hand tunnel toward the spring, feet slipping on the wet stone, lungs burning. Behind her, the world roared. The blast hit like a thunderclap from hell, a shockwave that lifted her from her feet and slammed her into the wall, the air filled with dust, heat, and the scream of collapsing stone. When she came to, the air was thick with grit. Her candle was gone. Her ears rang. She tried to move, but pain tore through her shoulder. Something heavy, a beam, maybe pinned her down. Above, she could hear shouts, then silence. The men had likely seen the explosion and fled, thinking the tunnels destroyed. Eleanor lay in the dark, half buried, every breath a fight. The air was thin, damp, alive with the scent of earth and gunpowder. She thought of Jonas, somewhere beyond the rubble if he was alive at all. Time lost meaning. Minutes, hours, she couldn't tell. At last, she felt movement, a scraping sound. Someone digging. Jonas, she croaked. A muffled voice answered, deep, hoarse, unmistakable. Don't move. Tears blurred her vision. You came back. Didn't have a choice, he said, the strain in his voice betraying the effort. You think I'd let them write the ending? He worked until his hands bled. The sound of shifting stones became her heartbeat. Finally, light broke through, faint and golden. His face appeared in the narrow gap, smeared with soot and mud, eyes burning with life. Can you crawl? He asked. She tried, gasping as he pulled her free inch by inch until she collapsed against him. They sat together on the damp floor of the passage, coughing, laughing, crying all at once. They'll think we're dead, Eleanor said. Jonas nodded. Then let them. The dead don't have debts or masters. They sat in silence, the tunnel breathing around them like a living thing. Through the cracks above, faint light filtered in the weak grey of dawn. What now? She whispered. Now we disappear, Jonas said. Follow the spring to the river. There's a sandbar downstream. I buried a skiff there before the fire. We head north. To where? He smiled faintly. Anywhere that'll have us. Eleanor hesitated, then reached into her bodice and pulled out the silver ring, pressing it into his hand. Keep it, she said. You've earned it more than I ever did. Jonas closed his fingers around it. We'll share it, like everything else. They rose together and began the long climb through the darkness toward the sound of rushing water. When they emerged, the first light of morning was breaking over the river, pink, silver, and endless. The ashes of rosewood smoked behind them, a ruin shrouded in mist. Jonas looked back only once. Let it rest, he said. Eleanor followed his gaze. It won't. Not while the truth lies buried with it. He turned to her, puzzled. She reached into the pocket of her torn dress and pulled out something small and leather-bound, Mercier's last journal, saved from the fire. History forgets what it can't face, she said. But we'll remember. Jonas's expression softened. Then maybe that's enough. They pushed the skiff into the water and climbed in. The current caught them, carrying them northward, away from Mississippi, away from the ghosts. As the river bent and the manor disappeared from view, Eleanor rested her head against Jonas's shoulder. The water murmured like a prayer. For the first time in months, she let herself believe in tomorrow. Later, much later, in a quiet farmhouse in Illinois, a woman calling herself Mrs. Ellis would open a bakery with a tall, soft-spoken man who made the best bread anyone had ever tasted. They would live quietly, without past or title, their walls lined with books written in French. And once a year, when the spring thaw came and the river swelled, Eleanor would take out the silver ring, hold it to the light, and whisper the same words engraved upon it: liberté, égalité, fraternité, freedom, equality, brotherhood. It was never gold that had been buried beneath Rosewood Manor. It was the seed of a new world,